I've had a few requests to break down some of my patches, one of which was my forest flute patch, and if you haven't seen that video, this is what it sounds like. I thought the best way to break down that patch would be to take out all the cables, initialize all the modules, and rebuild it from scratch, so that's what we're going to do today. Okay, I've got the patch here, and I'm going to highlight all of the modules and hit Command U on a Mac. I guess that would be Control U on a Windows machine to take out all the cables, and then Command I to initialize all the modules, and now here we are starting from scratch. I went through this patch before I started recording just so I could remember everything that I had done here, and one thing I noticed was that there's actually some modules in here that didn't end up getting used in the original patch. This one. So I'm just going to get rid of these because they're just cluttering up the patch if they don't end up getting used. Oh, and this one. The first thing we have to do is take the volts per octave out of this MIDI to CC module and put it in this mult, and then I'm going to send it to rings or resonator, to this sample and hold, and to this ONA module. I'm going to take the gate out of this MIDI to CV module, put it into this mult, and the clock is going to go into this clocked module, and then the clock module was set to ×4, ×2, and -4. And this -4 was triggering this sample and hold that's sampling the volts per octave coming out of the key step. And then that is going to go into this last oscillator that we have here. There, so now all of the oscillators we have are being fed volts per octave from the key step, which is what I used to sequence the original patch. And then the gate output from the key step is going to be going to this ADSR and to the Y input of Cosmos. This ONA module is going to be set to octave 4, and the sine output is going to go to this first filter, set about somewhere in the middle, and the band pass for that is going to come out and go to this first input, and this will become the final audio mixer for the patch. And the level on this first channel I had turned down just a little bit, and it's going to be triggered with this envelope. Now the mix for this entire audio mixer is going to be going into plateau. And I had plateau set to where dry is at 100%, the wet level is set to about 20%, maybe even a little less. I have this tendency of lining up these notches with these lines. I did it once and I liked the sound, and now it's just become a habit. These were set kind of like that. And so now just to recap, we have volts per octave going to rings and these two ONA modules. This one's going to a sample and hold first. It's being triggered by this divide 4 output, so it's going to be getting about 1 every 4 notes. The reason we have the dry all the way up on plateau is because I actually sent this straight to the output from here. This was the last step in the chain, and we can't hear anything yet until I create some kind of a sequence on here. And so I don't remember what the original sequence was that I created, but this one felt sort of reminiscent of the original sequence. So I've hit record. And so the key step actually became a really important part of this patch, not just because it's outputting the sequence and gate information and the clock, but also because it's able to overdub and add and change notes as the patch progresses. And that was a really important part of the original patch. If you're familiar with the key step, you may already know how to do that, but I'll explain how I did that at the end once we're done patching all of the cables here. So this is actually sounding pretty good just with the one oscillator going through one filter and a reverb. And now we're going to start creating our second voice for the patch. First, we're going to add clock 3 to this gate output, extend the length a little bit, and send this gate to our second ADSR. We're going to increase the decay, sustain, and release a little bit, and then add this envelope first to this first filter that our first voice is going through. Add that to the cutoff a little bit, and that's also going to be our envelope for our second voice, which will be our second ONA oscillator here. It will stay on octave 3, and the sine output is going to go to this font filter here. Increase the frequency to about halfway, and take the bandpass out to our mixer here. There. So because it's a lower octave, this is going to work almost like a bass line for us, which sounds lovely. Okay, now I'm going to take this black noise and add it to the sample and hold, and trigger it with clock 1. and that will trigger our X input on the Cosmos module. And now we're going to add the red noise to the sample and hold, trigger it with this NAND output on Cosmos, and send that to our last ADSR. And we're going to take the envelope out from that ADSR and put it into our third CV input in the VCA mix here. And that will control our last voice. And this one I had set to be a little more plucky, something like that. For rings, I had it set to the red mode on both sides. The frequency stays at 12 o'clock. Structure moves to about 230 and brightness 2. And I had damping and position set to about 11 o'clock. This odd output is going to go into this font filter here, increase the frequency and the resonance, and take that bandpass out and put it into our last mixing channel. And it just creates that little percussive element in the background. Okay, that's the basis of everything, and now we're going to add the modulation. This octosource was set to about here, this one was set to about there. And in the original patch, I had actually taken the clock 3 output and used it to modulate the wave CV input. And that just creates this really interesting irregularity where it kind of starts and stops. And then I had taken this bottom output and put that into the input for this slew LFO module. And I have it set to LFO mode and slow. The curve is all the way up, the rise and the fall are set to about half. And this output is going to go right here into this mixer. And this VCA mixer I was just using to attenuate modulation sources. So I'm going to turn this down a little bit, maybe about there. This is going to go into the wet channel modulation input for plateau. And I'm just going to increase it a little bit. And that same modulation source is going to go into the CV input for the high cut on the diffusion filter for plateau, and just a little bit. And you can hear how that creates a sense of movement in the reverb. Our last modulation source for this patch will be this second octosource. We'll take the top output and add it to the modulation depth CV input in plateau and increase the attenuator just a little bit. And then on the opposite side, we'll take the bottom output and add that to the CV input for the modulation rate in plateau and increase that to about the same level. And now we have them modulating to where one's high while the other's low, and they just kind of ebb and flow around each other, creating a little extra movement in the reverb. We're going to take this output here and add it to the CV input for the brightness of rings. And that'll just change the quality of the sound as the patch goes along. And lastly, we'll take this rightmost output and I want to add it to this VCA. Pull it down a little bit, and then we'll take that and put it into the CV input for the cutoff of this filter that we're already modulating with this ADSR to give it even more movement. And that's the whole patch. It's actually pretty simple. We just have a high voice, a low voice, and a percussive voice, and a big part of the original sound was the evolving melody. So I'll explain how I do that with the key step. To record our first sequence, we make sure we're in sequence mode, push the record button, and we play the notes that we want to have in the sequence in order. It doesn't matter how long we hold the notes down for, it's just adding notes to the order of the sequence. And now we hit play and they will play in order. And you can see it didn't matter how long it took me to play those notes, they're all playing equally in time. Now with the record button flashing, we can overdub notes, and that means if I put the octave up, I'm now in a higher register, and if I play notes on top, those notes are now replacing the notes that we had in the original sequence. And this is our new sequence. In this overdub mode, it does matter how long we hold notes down for. And that can be fun and creative because the melody will play back the way that you're playing it, but it will keep all the notes in time to a grid. The other way we can add notes to our sequence is by adding notes to the end of the sequence without changing any of the notes that are already in the sequence. To do this, we hit Shift, push record, and now whatever notes we play will be put onto the end of the sequence. Now if I play a really high note. And it doesn't matter where we are in the sequence when I add these notes, they will always be added to the end. It can be really fun to use these in combination because now, in doing this, I'm making the sequence longer, but I can go back, have the flashing record button again, and I can replace notes again. And so with this, we can create an endlessly evolving melody, and that was how I created the evolving melody in the original patch. And that's it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this patch breakdown. Please let me know in the comments if you'd like to see more of these, and I will see you in the next one.